The risk of military conflict following accidents and incidents in the Indo-Pacific is rising. Mounting tensions over Taiwan, the Korean Peninsula, and the South and East China Seas have strategists worried about the threat of escalation. How better can we understand the risks involved?
The concept of accidental conflict, where seemingly discrete events can spiral out of control into a much larger conflagration, is of course not a new concept. Perhaps the most talked about example of this concept is the case of the First World War, where the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand in late June of 1914 provided the spark that ultimately saw Europe's major powers sleepwalking to conflict. My view is that if there does end up being a war in this part of the world, I think there's a very strong case to be made that it could only be as a result of accidental conflict. The reason I think that is because I don't think any leader in their right mind could rationally opt to wage major power war in the current era, given the enormous financial and human costs involved, especially if that war were to go nuclear. I think it's no exaggeration to say that if such a conflict did occur, it could potentially make even the COVID-19 pandemic that we're all currently living through seem pale by comparison.
With numerous regional, territorial, and maritime disputes, the Indo-Pacific is more vulnerable to accidental conflict than most places in the world. What are the dangers in Korea?
There were close calls. Recently, we had a showdown in the air among Chinese, Russian, South Korean, Japanese aircrafts. And this is when Chinese, Russian aircrafts, they claimed they were doing some sort of air drill. But they basically went into South Korean airspace, and South Korea reacted. And then because South Korea reacted, Japan reacted, because that airspace was, again, the contested islets that I mentioned before. That's why Japan also reacted. And so there was a showdown in the air. Now, in air, of course, the pilots are taking orders from their commanders, but any misperception from their commanders and leaders on the ground could lead to some sort of miscalculation, misreading of each other's intent.
Similarly, China's attempts to strengthen its territorial and maritime claims in the East China Sea have increased the risks of naval incidents and skirmishes.
The Chinese Coast Guard ships continue to enter the contiguous and territorial waters around the Senkaku Islands, and as of yesterday, a record high of 137 consecutive days. So that's something that has been in the news quite often in Japan. And from August of last year, 2020, it seems that the Chinese Coast Guard has changed its policy, and Chinese Coast Guard seems to have is frequently chasing Japanese fishing boats in the territorial waters around the islands. And what the Japanese Coast Guard has been doing is to try to block the Chinese Coast Guard, and they come between the Chinese Coast Guard and the Japanese fishing boats. So this results in a very close encounter. You could see the three boats really close side by side with each other.
Against this backdrop, crisis management, avoidance measures, and confidence-building measures may be key to ensuring that incidents in the region don't spiral out of control.
So the past studies suggest the most dangerous situation for the accident escalation is not in the order of importance, but weak leadership, whether the leaders becomes hostage to nationalistic public opinion. And then secondly, inability to make concession at the very beginning of the crisis. The inability to make concessions and control the situation at the very beginning of the crisis seems to be important, because if that's not done, it will spiral and the cost of concession will rise domestically.
However, this might be easier said than done. Containing nationalism can be a difficult task, as nationalist sentiments in the Indo-Pacific region, and Northeast Asia in particular, are often deeply seated and stretch back centuries. In addition, transparency, which is the essence of crisis management and confidence-building measures, is hard to achieve. Disclosing military information is critical to raising predictability, which enables countries to read each other more accurately and to prevent accidental conflicts. This might prove to be a difficult objective in the context of the Indo-Pacific.
There's a so-called culture of secrecy among Northeast Asian countries. And this has to do partly with, or maybe in large part with, an issue of sovereignty. They think of it in terms of sovereignty. And so trying to get these three countries to be more transparent is realistically very difficult.